time for sound design, and today with the MC-303. So I've made a couple of videos with the Roland MC-303 groovebox where I asked myself the question, is there music left in the MC-303? Go check out those videos if you want to know the answer to that question. In today's video we're going to focus on sound design, and the centerpiece of this video is the MC-303. I have it here right next to me on the desk, so we're going to pull up some sounds, do some tweaking on the device itself, bring it into Ableton, maybe add a few effects in Ableton as well to pimp up the sound. Also send some MIDI from Ableton to this device so we don't have to use the internal sequencer, and just explore what kind of sounds that are kind of usable in a modern context, because this machine is from the late 90s, and also to show you what you can do with a bit of tweaking and effects to see what kind of sounds we can get out of this thing. Let's start exploring some sounds on the MC-303. So first let's load up a empty pattern. So by default you're on pattern A01, A01. So if we scroll with the wheel back, I believe this one is empty. It's a small U, so that's how you can see it. Let's go to tone and load up tone on bank 1. It's the synth bank number 15. And that is, I believe, the soft flute tri-lead 1. So that's the sound in bank 1, number 15. And the idea is now to create some kind of dub siren sound. It's the sound that you heard in the intro of this video. So for that, we're going to play it maybe 2 octaves higher, or 1 octave higher. And the first thing we want to do is have the LFO modulate the filter cutoff. So if we put up the resonance and play with the filter cutoff, but then we want to modulate that. So if I do shift here at the bottom, it says wave, pitch, filter, amp from the LFO. So shift, filter. So we send the LFO to the filter cutoff, maybe 64 to start with. Put the modulation quite high and the rate something like this. So now the LFO is modulating the filter cutoff. The other thing we want to do is maybe have some release. So I'm going to do function, and then now for the envelope we are affecting the release time, so crank that up. So now we have that kind of dubby kind of effect. There are 2 effects you can have simultaneously on the MC-303. It's the delay or the reverb and the flanger or the chorus. So let's put both of these effects on this sound. So let's start with the delay. Let's select the delay type. So it's PDY, and then part level, let's send a little bit more, maybe also something like 70. And then the time rate, maybe something like this, and function, the effects level quite high. So now you can hear the delay, it's very stereo. And now if we play with the filter cutoff, that's overdriving a little bit my sound card. Alright, and the second effect is the flanger chorus. So let's hold shift and do type. It's on flanger already. And then do part level. So maybe send something like 40, 50. Let's select the effect and the effect level. Okay, so the reason why I didn't get the exact sound is because the LFO was also modulating the pitch, and I think that's by default. So if you do shift 10, that's the pitch for the LFO, and you turn it down, then it only affects now the filter. So this is what we want, this kind of sound. So the thing I would do now in Ableton is add some auto pan to this to create a bit more stereo spread or a bit more movement in the stereo field. And it's kind of important to make sure you don't clip into the sound card because of the resonance being all the way turned up. So I turn it down a little bit on the MC-303 to make sure you don't go into the red. So yeah, that's the first sound that It's kind of a dub siren type of sound. It's kind of like a sound effect. With these kind of sounds, but also with this machine, it's really about finding the sweet spot. So to replicate this, the exact thing that I have, it's a bit difficult. So the best thing is just you record into Ableton or into your DAW, just turn it on, start tweaking with this thing. And then at some point you find the sound that you want and then you have it recorded and then you can use it in your track. There's a lot of shift and function items with these buttons, so there's only 8 buttons on the MC-303 and the rest is hidden between shift and function. So it's not the most intuitive user interface if you compare it to like a Prophet Rev 2 where you have tons of knobs and everything's laid out per knob. So it takes a bit of getting used to. Moving on to sound number 2, and that is from the piano bank 10, and it's sound number 5, the E piano number 3. Just as a quick tip, you can use the jog wheel to go patch by patch or sound by sound, but there are around like 250 sounds in the MC-303, so that will take some time. If you hold shift, you go by increments of 10. So then you can quickly go to bank 10 and then sound number 5. Also another thing is that the real-time effects or modify is still applied to this sound now. So I want to open up the filter, turn down the resonance, and also turn down the filter, the LFO affecting the filter, as well as the other effects, the delay and the flanger. So now I have the basic sound. So it's kind of a sampled E piano. It sounds a bit corny maybe, but I think we can make something from this. So what I did is I have a MIDI track in Ableton that's going out to my sound card into the MC-303, so I don't have to use the sequencer. And then I came up with this melody. Written in C minor, very basic. And then the main thing I want to play with is the envelope. So on the MC-303 there is an attack, decay, release envelope. So there are 3 parameters, but it's 1 knob. So the attack is by default. If you press this button here, you get the decay setting. And then if you press the function, you get the release setting. So it's not intuitive again, but it has all the parameters that you want. So what I want to do is have a short release, basically all the way down, and then a decay that's also quite short. Let's start with 0 and let's turn it down when I play the loop. Let's turn up the volume a bit. If you turn it all the way down, it's too short, I think. Somewhere here. Often I use the ADR to create very short sounds and then add delay to it to create a full sort of sound again. And now having this sound with the short decay and basically no release, I'm gonna add first a little bit of overdrive. So I use the roar effect in Ableton. And then a delay. And you hear the kind of ticking because the decay is so short on the MC-303 that you hear this kind of ticking of the sound. That's kind of a nice quality, I think. Let's play with decay while I play this loop. And let's also play with the attack a bit. So I also added a little bit of release now and then shortened the decay again. So I think this is super nice just with the ADSR and especially the decay. You can create kind of different sounds, and what I would do is I would let this loop run for like 16 bars or 32 bars and then tweak the knob a bit every 4 bars for instance, or every 8 bars, just to create a bit of variation and then use that in different parts of a track that I would build in Ableton. Funny thing is that it sounds kind of different in color or because of the length and the little artifact when it's that short, because this is without using the filter at all. So it's just the ADSR and then some effects in Ableton. So kind of a cool sound, I think. Let's move on to the next sound. And for the next sound, I'm gonna go to Bank 11. It's the Organ Bank Sound 8. It's the 60s organ. And that sounds like this. So Shift and the jog wheel. Let's reset the parameters. This is the 60s organ. The MC-303 is polyphonic, so you can play chords with it. This keyboard is maybe not the easiest to do it with, but... And the sounds are available over many octaves, so that's a good thing. So for this sound, I programmed, again, a MIDI loop in Ableton, sending it out to the MC-303, and then doing a little bit of playing around with the filter, and for the rest, it's effects in Ableton. So first, let's look at the MIDI loop that I have in Ableton. So again, in C minor, I programmed this loop. So it's a combination of chords and single notes, and it sounds like this. So it's very short and stuttery. It sounds a bit like early game music, because it is an organ and there's this very pure kind of sine wave kind of tone. It sounds a bit like early game music. What I've kind of found out with the filter on the MC-303 is if you crank the resonance up quite high and then cut down the filter a little bit, kind of create this metallic compared to this. So this sounds a bit dull, and then if we do it like this, it sounds a bit sharper. And then with some effects in Ableton, first do a bit of fuzz, very little because the dry wet is at 25%. Just to create a little bit of crunch, a delay, and then an auto pen. Yeah, this is a super quirky sound, but I kind of like that it sounds a bit metallic, and then with the fuzz that is very little actually, because it's 25% only, and then with the delay you create a bit of crunch, but you still get that, have that kind of a game vibe going on. All right, and then for the last sound, we're still in Bank 11, the organ bank, and there's a sound number 11 in Bank 11 called Organ EFX loop. So let's look that one up. It is an FX sound, so it sounds a bit weird. So obviously you can hear that this sound is looped already, and play it an octave higher, it sounds pretty bad. But if you play it an octave or 2 octaves lower, it has like some kind of noise in it, and this is just like a bed for like an ambient piece or like a movie scene. If you add some movement to this with an LFO. So that's what I want to do. Let's first go to Ableton, where I created another MIDI loop. So I basically created this 2-bar loop, C, C, B, E, very basic, and it sounds like this. But what I want to do is use the LFO on the MC-303 to manipulate the amp volume. So basically create a tremolo on the MC-303 to kind of break up this sound and create a bit more interest and be able to play with that as well in real time. So if you go to the LFO settings here at the bottom, it's key 9, 10, 11 and 12. It says wave, pitch, filter, amp. So we can choose what kind of waveform the LFO has. We can affect the pitch, the filter or the amp. Now it's affecting none of these three. If you look at the wave, we have a sine, random 1, random 2, square, saw, triangle. So sine is fine for now. Let's go to the amp and let's affect the amp a little and then also change the modulation level of the LFO quite high, and then we can play with the rate. So I'll play the MIDI loop now and you can hear. Especially on the long note, you hear it immediately that the volume is affected. So if I turn this down to 0 again, so it's shift, it's a constant note. If I turn this up all the way to 127, you can hear that it is affecting the volume 100%. And now we can play with the rate. So that's the speed. So maybe we want to go down to 40 actually. And this is one of those things you just want to play around with the rate and with the amount as well from the LFO to the amp, just to find kind of that sweet spot and maybe find two kind of sweet spots and move in between them. So again, this is like just put Ableton into record mode and play around with this until you find like a good kind of loop that you record, and you can cut it out of the long recording and use that in your track. So let's play around with this a little bit more. And let's also change the wave of the LFO to see what kind of effect that has. Square wave sounds kind of nice too. This square wave sounds kind of like hesitating, and it's kind of a nice groove. And the nice thing is that you can change all these settings on the fly. So you can just let your MIDI run from Ableton. I just turned the volume down so I can talk over it, but you can manipulate this just in real time and you don't have to stop and get out of the flow. So as you can see, you can play around with this and tweak these settings with the MC-303 forever, which is what I typically do, and then record that into Ableton to find something that is nice. And in this case, I didn't add any effects on top of this in Ableton, but some kind of delay or something else, maybe even actually a tremolo on top of it. Of this tremolo that could lead to interesting results as well. This was a quick sound design session on the MC-303, showing you different effects and different ways to use the LFO to kind of make these sounds more useful in a modern context. And then on top of that, some effects from Ableton just on the live input of this MC-303. Let me know how you use the MC-303 for sound design. What are your tips and tricks for this somewhat limited machine, but also kind of deep machine? As always, thanks for watching, keep making music, and see you in the next one.